Welcome to What's the Story Dublin, the official Dublin City Council podcast with me, your host, Deirdre Malumbi. This podcast deep dives into the work of all the moving parts that make up Dublin City Council. It also shares news of the Council's latest initiatives and exciting events. In today's episode, we're looking at Sports and Wellbeing. I'm delighted to be joined today by Aideen O'Connor, who is the Programmes and Services Development Manager of the Dublin City Sport and Wellbeing Partnership. Aideen, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Delighted. Before we discuss all things sports and wellbeing, Aideen, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to work for Dublin City Council and a little bit about your current role.
Yeah, so I actually started work in Dublin City Council in 2007. And I came in, I always worked in sports and fitness. That was my background. That's what I studied in college. And back then, I suppose you could say it wasn't as popular as it probably is now, you know, in terms of sports and fitness and health. So I worked in many gyms and then kind of moved into the management side of operations, liked it. And then the job came up for a sport and recreation officer at the time. And I just said, you know what, I'll give it a go. And I got the job. So that was how I kind of came into the council, and I was working as a sport and recreation officer probably only for maybe 2 years or so. And I was lucky enough then to kind of act up into a more coordinator role, which was the start of, as you would call, the local sports partnership. But at the time it was called the network. Mm-hmm. So it was a sports network of just national governing bodies, DCC sports representatives coming together to try and deliver some sort of physical activity programme for the people living in the city. Then I kind of had the opportunity to go for, I suppose, a promotion. It was still in sports, but it was for the centres, you know, the sports and fitness centres. So I actually left that role. I got that job and I went to manage Markovic and Irish Town Stadium for about 3.5 years. So it gave me kind of an insight into how the public sports and fitness centres are ran compared to the private, because that's where I'd come from. And I loved it. I loved working in the gyms. I loved working in the centres. And then I got the opportunity to come back into the sports partnership when it kind of changed from the network into the sports partnership, and it evolved a little bit more. And I saw it as a kind of an exciting opportunity to come back and see where was sport and physical activity in the city, how could we grow it. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of these things, like, I love sport. I've always worked in it. I've always played sport. So it's kind of like I get to do what I love to do on a daily basis.
Brilliant. So it sounds like you've worked in such a breadth of roles related to sports and wellbeing that you are the perfect person to talk to today about today's topic. So I suppose, first of all, Aideen, I was hoping you would talk to me a bit about how many sports centres and facilities does Dublin City Council actually operate, and can you talk a bit about maybe some of the bigger kind of centres and facilities?
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of people wouldn't maybe realise or notice that we actually operate over 30 centres across the city. Now, the centres are kind of broken down, and you could say in two ways. So we've got our big sports and fitness facilities that, you know, would have maybe the pools, the gyms, the studios, and then we have recreation centres as well. So it's kind of like it's broken down 18, 14. So we've got 18 kind of sports, fitness centres around, and then 14 recreation centres across the city. So when you call it a recreation centre, normally that would be a dry centre that's based, you know, in the heart of the community, and it's kind of got like your sports hall. It might have like your kitchen, it might have your studio, it might have a little small gym, but it's a recreational centre for like groups to come and use. Then when you see what we have in terms of sports and fitness, that would be like we call our big five. So we've got Ballymun Fitness Centre, Ballyfermot, we've got Finglas, we've got Markovic, we've got Irish Town Stadium. So they'd be kind of like, we'd call them the big ones. You know, they're the ones that have the swimming pools, they're the ones that have the big gyms, the big halls, the pitches, all the multi-use kind of facilities that you need, studios, classrooms. And so they're kind of our main big facilities that we'd have. And then you also kind of, I suppose, on side of that, we have standalone facilities as well. So like our water sports facilities fall into that. So we have the rowing centre in Island Bridge. We have Eastwall Water Sports as well, which is great. And then we've our standalone pools. So like you'd have the likes of Coolock, Sean McDermott Street, you've got Crumlin, and obviously a few others as well. So we've got so many different facilities dotted around the whole of Dublin City, that sometimes maybe the general public might not realise that it's actually a Dublin City Council run facility.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think as well there is that association of facilities with just being gyms, but you guys manage so much more. There are the playgrounds, there are the outdoor gyms, community pools. Mugas is something I've also seen pop up. If you can explain maybe a bit what that is.
Yeah, so like we do. And the thing as well is that sometimes, even though, say, like the outdoor gyms, you would think that they'd fall in the remit of sports, but they actually fall in the remit of parks. But we work closely with our park section to decide kind of the locations of where those outdoor gyms might go. In terms of mugas are normally put in once again, we would say embedded into the community. So a mugga is basically a multi-use games area. So you could have basically a 5-a-side, 7-a-side pitch marked out, but within that you might also have 2 basketball rings that are up high, and you can play multi-sports. That's basically what a mugga is. And it's normally like, sits within a community area, could sit within like your block of flats. Like there's a good few different ones that are dotted around the heart of the city, particularly kind of like in the inner city. So you'd have one in northeast inner city. You've got one around by Markovich Flats, Pier Street. There's a lot of them dotted around the area. The idea is obviously that there's somewhere where there's a space to play.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned a couple of times this partnership, and for the listener, we often refer to this in the council as DCSWP, which stands for Dublin City Sport and Wellbeing Partnership. So can you explain to me, Aideen, a bit about the partnership and what does it actually do? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I suppose I'd have to first kind of all bring you back just a little bit to get an understanding. So there's 29 local sports partnerships in the country. So there's basically one you could say, in every county, okay? And it was set up, I think, in the year 2005, maybe even a little bit before that. I think we joined in 2005, but it might have started in 2000 by Sport Ireland. So it was an initiative driven by Sport Ireland at the time that they saw that they needed was a kind of like an organisation there so that they could be the sole provider of sport and physical activity in their county or city. So the way it works at the moment is there's 29, but some of us, as we call ourselves, local sports partnerships within a local authority structure. And then we have a couple of local sports partnerships that would be like a limited company, operate as a limited company. However, they would still, link very closely with the local authorities. So the very first role or the remit of a local sports partnership was to provide physical activity opportunities for people of all ages, of all abilities, regardless of race, gender, background, within their county or within their city. So in essence, that's what a sports partnership does. And they do it through programming, education and training, engagement of groups, seeing what like the local community needs and wants are, and then looking at, I suppose, national trends, European trends around what groups are not engaging in physical activity and how do we get them to engage in physical activity. So it's all about breaking down barriers, creating access and providing that opportunity. And it's when we say sport, I know it's that we're Dublin City Sport and Wellbeing Partnership. And it's important that sometimes people, when they hear the word sport, if they're not actually engaged in a physical activity or they're not in maybe a sport environment, they just think, oh, sport, competitive. Mm-hmm. We're participation. We are at grassroots levels on the ground. We're not necessarily looking for the next Katie Taylor. However, we will support that and advocate that, and the likes of Kelly Harrington would be a local ambassador for Dublin City Council, and we love to see that. But what we really want is those children just getting engaged in their clubs and inspiring to be the next Katie Taylor, but in a way that is suitable to what they want to do.
It really does sound like the partnership is for anyone and everyone. And actually, I would like to ask you a little bit more about this idea of inclusion, integration and community, which I think, the Sports and Wellbeing Partnership really targets. So can you talk to me a bit about those elements of the partnership, maybe some examples from 2024 where inclusion, integration and community were prioritised and in relation to these?
So I suppose the first thing to point out is that I probably didn't touch on this, but we have 18 core sports officers across the city. But on top of that, then we have sports officers with a particular expertise or responsibility for a particular area. So we have 2 sports inclusion and integration officers. So their role is solely just to engage with people inclusive of disability, integration, new communities, and try and get them involved in physical activity and sport. So they don't just go out and deliver programs. What I've noticed over the last year or two with those roles is there's a huge demand, just even from the general public and parents, of where can I send my child to take part in a programme? What club is inclusive to my child's needs, whether they're autistic, whether they have an actual physical disability, where can I go and what services are there for us? Because I know you'd have your national services and your national charities, but the role of the Sport Inclusion and Integration Officer is to try and link that back locally on the ground to where those children are, need those services. So, for example, the Sports Inclusion Integration Officers, they are now trained to run disability courses. So they can either deliver the courses to teachers, they can deliver to parents, they can deliver to volunteers and leaders. We do disability inclusion training, we do autism and sport training, so that where we can offer to clubs, okay, if you have coaches and volunteers and leaders that are just not sure, how do we engage, how do we make our training sessions basically open to all, this is the course for you to do. And in terms of the integration, I'm not going to say that we do it extremely well, because it's actually one of the hardest parts of the job. Absolutely. Because they have to try and reach the really, really hard to reach, the ones that we can't engage with. And sometimes the people that we engage with are people who probably have a positive experience with our programs and they come back. But we kind of go, right, well, we're delighted you're back. We now have you. And then we try and, create the pathway for them. But what we're constantly looking for is the next hard to reach group, the next group who's not engaged in physical activity. So when it comes to the integration piece, new communities, like they're all coming from different backgrounds. They're all coming with a different story. Particularly if you look, at the crisis with Ukraine, when we had such an influx of Ukrainian people, they're coming with a lot of trauma. And you would think that the last thing on their mind is physical activity. But actually, when we sent our sports officers into some of the direct provision centres and where the Ukrainians were hosted, the majority of them did actually want some sort of an outlet, if it was to take their mind off their families or what was happening over in their country for 30 minutes. And you would find that actually a lot of them come with a lot of skill sets. So Ukrainians are actually really good their sports would be like boxing and gymnastics. So we would have tried to tap into, okay, well, what's their culture? What are they known for, in terms of the sport and physical activity side? And let's see if we can just kind of integrate that into where they are. So then we would use our boxing officers. So we have boxing officers, we have different co-funded officers through our national governing bodies. And so we target, kind of the programmes, and then we target the areas. So a little bit of research has to go into, well, where are these people? How do you break down the barriers? So we would have had to do get a language. And actually, in one way we were lucky. One of our sports officers, Igor, is actually from the Ukraine, and he had family over there while he was still here. But he utilised, I suppose you could say, his passion for his country, the anger obviously that was happening, and came on board then for us to launch our Ukrainian sports programme in the kind of St. Catherine's Liberties area, and he was able to translate. He was there to just talk to them and actually they were able to say, well, at least you do know what's happening. Because it's all well and good us going in and saying, hey, we're here to deliver sport and physical activity. But if we don't really have that kind of connection with them, you're not going to get that engagement from them.
Sounds like there's a huge amount to it all. And this is the answer to this is probably going to be anything and everything. But what sports are covered by the partnership?
Oh, God. Yeah, you're right. Everything and anything. But I suppose I'll give you an example. So we normally try... I'll start with the co-funded. So we have co-funded officers, so separate to our core. And the sports that we co-fund currently at the moment are athletics, rowing, football. I always try and name them out. We have swimming, we have cricket, and we have... I always end up missing one. There's 7. Don't know how many I listed there. But we'd co-fund the teams. And then as well as that, then we work with all the national governing bodies of sport as best we can. So like we'd work with tennis, we'd work with basketball, handball, we do pickleball now, we do any kind of growing sport that we think there's a niche for. We do. We're delivering flag football at the moment in partnership with the New York Jets, which is an amazing programme, and that's targeted at young girls. But like, we're open to working with all sports, and then when I say sports, we then also work in terms of our coaches and instructors: yoga, tai chi, Pilates, kids yoga, little fitness boot camps, park hit. We engage in park runs, so we don't just kind of solely focus on the sport necessarily. We also have kind of physical activity. So we do walking programs. We do loads of different kind of swimming programs. We do outdoor swim programs as well. So hiking, biking. There's just a multitude. Discos, dances, glow football, like. You name it, we've probably delivered it, we've probably tried it. But yeah, so I'm open to any suggestions.
and that's for kind of, novices and for like absolute beginners.
Absolutely.
The whole range is covered.
Like really, that's who we want to target. I'm not saying that we care about every citizen and everyone who visits, works, lives in the city. If there's somebody already involved in a club, well, then we have support for club structure. We've support for volunteers and leaders. But realistically, what we want to try and get is our young people involved in sport, physical activity at an early age, and whether that be in a participation or in background, like jobs in administration in sport, social media is huge, event management. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the person is physically doing a sport, but just that they're aware that they just have to be physically active, during a week, and that they're leading a healthy lifestyle. And a lot of the time for us, it's about the story, it's about the person, it's about like, who are the people we're engaging with and why? And like, for example, we would have done the marathon programme there recently, whereby we wanted to give the opportunity to people who had never done a marathon before, avail of an opportunity to get a place on the marathon. And this would be partnership with obviously the investment that Dublin City Council put into the marathon, which is great. And it's, the marathon was huge this year in terms of spectators, in terms of participation, and then in terms of the money it brings into the city. But some of the people that took part in that programme had stories that would just break your heart, and at the same time inspire you in a way that you just go, this is why we do what we do, because you're kind of going, okay, we've just given them an opportunity, and maybe we've just started them on a journey that they're now going to pass on to their children. The child's going to see mum going out for a run at 7 o'clock in the morning and coming back 2 hours later, and but that's what we're trying to instill, is this kind of like, if you do it, somebody else will do it. Monkey see, monkey do. Follow, so that's kind of where we're at, and that's why we try and follow a lot of when we deliver on our programs, we try and figure out what's the story behind it, who are the people, can we get, because we've started to do a lot more recordings of people, we've started to ask them, do you mind sharing us why you're taking part in this program, what are the benefits to you, what has it done for you? And so we're also learning then, when we get that information, while we're promoting ourselves, we're still learning a lot about, okay, well, did that programme actually work? And not all the time do the programmes work. Like, you might set up a programme and for whatever reason it doesn't work. It could be the time, it could be the person, it could be just, it's a not suitable programme for the area that it was in. So while we try and deliver core programmes that happen across the city at different times, at different stages through the calendar year, we also are aware that there's different needs in every community. We work a lot with youth groups, young people that are involved in some of the organisations. We do the Goshka programme as well. So we try and educate and train the young people. And we have young people that were involved in sport development programmes that happened maybe 15, 20 years ago. And we still have stories where one or two of them would come up to the sports officers and say, you saved my life. I was ready to go into Mountjoy and took part in your biking programme, got trained up as a leader, then got trained up as a volunteer, and now I'm working in youth service. So they're the stories that we don't get to share. Obviously I'm getting to share today, which is great, and that's what makes the job so rewarding and enjoyable,
And one of the things that I think is so great about the partnership, Aideen, is the fact that it has events going year round. Can you talk to us about some of the kind of big annual ones? Just a few months ago, I did a yoga class as part of Her Outdoors, so I definitely have a bit of favouritism towards that one.
Yeah. Well, so what we do is we align our calendar with the national calendar for Sport Ireland, in terms of the initiatives that they would do. And then there's some initiatives that we've inherited over the years that have just grown and grown and grown. So like, for example, we start off in January with our Change for Life programme that runs across the city. It's it's for everyone and anyone, and it's basically a physical activity programme. Nutrition's involved in it, dance, yoga, fitness classes, and we try and run that across the year from January to March, which lead us in nicely into, let's say, Women in Sport Week, national initiatives. So our programmes, then we showcase the work that we do with our women in sport. Then you kind of move into, say, Active Schools Week with the schools. We do our cross country series, and we do that as well. Coming into summer months, then we run all our summer camps through the recreation centres. We'd have our co-funded running their sport specific summer camps. Then we run into Her Outdoors Week, which is like a celebration of every activity you can do outdoors for women. So we'd use like the water sports centre, our hiking programmes, our biking programmes. Then we kick into what we would say is our biggest event of the year, which is Sports Fest. It's our flagship event, and we deliver it during European Week of Sport. And then, like, throughout the year, you'll have the likes of other big events that are happening in the city that we try and link into. So the Women's Mini Marathon, the City Marathon, the Liffey Swim. There's a lot of those events that are kind of crossover between sport and events, which is great. And then, like, for end of year, you're looking at, we do workshops with sports officers, we do conferences, seminars, we did like education and training, governance workshops for the clubs. There's just such a variety of flagship events that, like, the calendar just gets bigger and bigger each year. And every year I'm like, oh my God, how are we going to get all this done? But we do. We manage.
And can you talk to me a bit about the sports plan? What exactly is this, and why is it so important?
Yeah, so for a while, we didn't have a strategy. As in, when I say we, I can only say that Dublin City Sports and Wellbeing didn't have a strategy. We had a Stride strategy, worked extremely well, but that went out of date. And with that going out of date, the idea of these local sports plans had kind of popped up through the national agenda with Sport Ireland and the LGMA, and it was going to be something that we could look at. But it was also at the same time that the sports section itself was looking at their own strategic plan, and it was agreed that the sports plan would align with like the city development plan, and that it would be just a bigger plan. So it wasn't just going to be a strategy for the sports partnership, it was going to be a strategy for the whole of the sports section. So the Dublin City Sports Plan was launched in May of 2024, and it'll run till 2029. It's a 5-year sports plan, and there's three kind of key, you could say, three key pillars to it. One is infrastructure and facilities, 2 is programming, and 3 is organisation. There's also the main vision, mission, objective of the whole plan is to get people more active more often, is to basically be an active city, but to be one of the leading active cities. And so we're actually going to apply for active city status, which is another initiative that we're involved in, a European initiative that we're involved in. And the sports plan, it kind of addresses it. It's not the answer to everything, because we can't be everything to all. But in terms of infrastructure and facilities, there will be huge investment going into our facilities by upgrading and some new facilities. The programming side of the house is we're going to try and just see where we can actually, where the areas are that we need to improve on, promote what we're already doing really well, and then review and evaluate by using data, it'll be insight led. And then the organisation is more around the culture. How do we kind of look at creating, a really positive culture for our sports section department, whether that be different roles that are there, and just in general the structure of how our sports partnership operates, our centres operate, that we can have better impact in the community, better services to improve our services. So it's great to have this sports plan in place, and it will be used as a guide for our actions over the next 5 years, and it will be reviewed in between, and then hopefully from that we'll be able to maybe move on to a bigger and better plan. But the whole idea is that, we become known as an active city and a leader in sport and physical activity in the city.
Brilliant. That's absolutely perfect, Aideen. I suppose, thank you so much today for giving us such a fantastic overview of everything that Dublin City Council does in relation to sport. I suppose my very last question for you would be, what would you love to see the council do, or what areas would you love to see it explore in terms of like sports and well-being going into 2025 and even beyond that?
It would be that, I suppose, every child, and I know this sounds like oh my God, but but every child just should be afforded the opportunity to be able to find their love of some sort of sport or physical activity, whatever that may be, and that we've been a part of that to help them achieve that. Because if we get them young, we'll keep them. If we don't get them at a young age, it's going to be very hard to get them at a later stage, and that we just try and capture that and then bring them along the journey with us,
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect note to leave it on. Thank you so much for chatting to me today, Aideen. I think you've really inspired the listeners to get active and get involved.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks again to today's guest, Aideen O'Connor. I'd also like to extend my thanks to our audio engineer and editor, Robert Fay. This podcast was produced by myself, Deirdre Malumbi, and Michael Ryan, and recorded in the Central Library Studio. Be sure to spread the word if you're enjoying What's the Story Dublin, and to like and subscribe for future episodes. Slán go fóill.